This is Reverse Engineered.
Hi everyone, my name is Jon Penland, and Reverse Engineered is brought to you by Kinsta, a premium managed hosting provider. In today's episode, I'm speaking with David Wurtz, founder in residence at Google. David, welcome to Reverse Engineered.
Thanks, John. Happy to be here.
Yeah, well, we're so pleased that you have joined us today. So to get us started, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. My name is David Wurtz. I am a founder in residence at Google and have been at Google for 14 years, straight out of engineering school back in 2007. Landed my dream job of working at Google and building some really awesome products since.
Yeah, so landed your dream job working at Google. What was it that made that your dream job? Like, how did you come to work at Google?
Yeah, so a couple of my classmates actually in classes above me had told me amazing things about the company, and I was just super excited to hear all the stories about how they were building products for millions of users, and couldn't have been more delighted to get a job offer back in 2007. I was actually studying bioengineering in school, and every chance I got in the summers, I was actually working in tech. I actually dropped out of school and did a Y Combinator startup. And so come senior year, when I was finishing up my engineering degree, it was pretty clear I wanted to be in tech. And Google was just on that short list of companies that was really appealing, just based on all the stuff that, that they were doing at the time and all the great things that I'd heard about the company.
Yeah, so you'd heard a lot of great things about Google from these other folks that you knew, been exposed to tech in general. Were you like a Google user yourself? Were you already involved with some of the products and whatnot that they had out in the ecosystem?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I was using Google every day. And it's funny when from the outside, a lot of people just think of Google as just the search engine, and maybe they're familiar with some other things like Gmail. But one of the biggest surprises I had when I entered the company back then was just how much stuff was going on inside the company.
Yeah.
How many cool projects there were, how many opportunities there were in other areas. And that's been true even 14 years later with just the amount of stuff that we're working on. That's just mind-blowingly awesome.
Sure. Yeah. As somebody who, at Kinsta, we our managed hosting platform, we're built entirely on Google Cloud. And we use Google Workspace. And of course, everybody's familiar with Google. And then we're also deeply relying on Google Analytics and Search Console and all this stuff as a very content-driven company. And we're buying Google ads. So yeah, I'm very kind of familiar with, Google is a search engine, and that's like a tiny piece, right? Yeah. There's a lot else going on there. So. Yep. But something you mentioned during your introduction, your role is founder in residence. What is a founder in residence?
Yeah, so I've always gravitated toward the 0 to 1 problem. I really like identifying opportunities and putting together solutions in the form of product to address those opportunities, to go after those opportunities. And the founder in residence role is an opportunity to do that. So. Founder in residence are tasked with understanding what the company could potentially be doing that it's not. And that's a really fun job because at Google, because there's so many things, so many teams, so much expertise in lots of different subject matter, there's a lot of opportunity in all sorts of directions. And we surf the entire, inside of the company, looking for those opportunities, and then pitch projects to invest further in and turn into products.
Yeah. So, as founder in residence, what's something that you're working on right now that you can talk about?
I guess you could say I graduated from founder in residence into founder. So, nice. so founder in residence, they search for opportunities, and then when they find something, they go after it and build a team and a product around it. So for the last year, I've been working on a fintech in the corporate credit card space. It's called Zess, and so the premise there, and the reason why we were so excited about it, is that large companies like Google have employee credit card programs. They give credit cards out to their employees so that the employees don't have to burn personal credit when they're traveling for business or just incurring charges associated with their job. But the maintenance associated with managing that program is actually really high, and it's very tedious. And so what Google did about 10 years ago, when we were first rolling out our corporate credit card solution, was we built software to automate a lot of the maintenance tasks associated with the corporate credit card. And so we actually have built that program into the second largest corporate credit card program in the world. And the reason why we were able to get there with a fairly small amount of manual effort was because of that software. And so as part of my founder in residence exploration, this struck me as an opportunity because it was a problem that almost every large multinational company has, and one where we had a unique perspective as users. We had built a solution to a problem that we had, and we had a really interesting and valuable vantage point that I think is pretty rare and hard to achieve. And so, for the last year, my team and I hired a small team of folks that I had worked with in the past at Google. Some of the best engineers I've ever worked with, and just phenomenal team. And we've went and completely rebuilt the software with the idea of productionizing it. And so we're working with a few pilot customers and have some bank partnerships, and we're really excited.
Yeah. So the idea here is Google had this problem within the company, which was the maintenance and administration of a corporate card program. They spun their own, and then you came along as a founder in residence and said, we have this asset sitting here. It's not really designed or suitable for external consumption right now, but there's potential here. If this was a problem at Google, it's going to be a problem somewhere else. And how can we take this idea that we're already using internally? How can we take this idea to market? Does that kind of encapsulate the process there?
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think, when it comes to innovation within a large company, I think the founder in residence role is key to spotting those opportunities and making sure that Google's doing all we can to go after the opportunities we're well positioned to go after. And it's also really fun to spot those opportunities as well, because you're starting with a vantage point and a momentum and a skill set that is otherwise would take a lot of time to gain.
That's really interesting. So there's this idea that I've heard expressed. You're kind of the third person to express this concept to me, which is of taking an idea within an organization, something that's happening within the organization already, and finding a way to bring it to market. So I was in another interview, I had Shane Perlman describe this as commoditizing the company byproduct. So in their case, they were developing plugins and different things, and they were like, we're developing these things for clients. Let's get the licensing figured out so we can actually bring this to market. And then actually, I was listening to another podcast with an interview with Jason Fried of Basecamp, and he talked about how Basecamp had come about. And basically, they built their own project management system and then said, this is an awesome product. Let's figure out how to commoditize this product. And what I'm hearing is just kind of this like repeating chorus of within an established company, there may be times where you can take something that the company is doing internally and bring it to market. And I keep seeing that idea come up. Is that something that the founder in residence program at Google aims to identify potentially is sort of these internal things that are already happening, and how do we bring them to market?
Yep, exactly. And I think I think it's just as relevant for startups as it is large companies like Google. I think it all comes down to having context for what you're building.
Yeah.
And being a user of your own product and having solved a real need it's a very organic way for something to come into the world, because it's not hypothetical. It's that there's a problem out there, and oftentimes those products go on to achieve greater things than they were originally anticipated to achieve, because they started with something real and grew from there.
Yeah. Yeah. So Zest is not the only thing that you've worked on within the Google ecosystem. I know there's some other stuff that you've worked on as well. Can you tell us about some other Google products that you've worked on in the past?
Yeah. So, I've been at Google quite a while. In all honesty, I didn't think I'd ever be at a single place for 14 years, and it's sort of crazy to think about. I think I credit that to just having opportunities to go from 0 to 1 in all sorts of different areas. And I found it really enjoyable personally to climb the learning curve of various industries. Currently, the fintech industry and corporate credit cards, but before that, had an opportunity to go deep in Google. So I co-founded Google Fonts, and the world of typography and web fonts is just fascinating. Such a really tight-knit community of creators and folks that are so passionate about design. It pained us as a search engine company to see websites embed text in images, because it's not semantically correct. It's hard to parse. Right. It's usually slower to load using embedding everything in image than actually just using the text. And so we decided to invest a bit of attention in this problem and give the web access to open source, free to use, high quality web fonts. And that was really fun, because it's actually one of Google's most popular APIs in terms of the amount of, but billions of websites use the font API to power all sorts of experiences. It's built into third-party tools like Canva and Figma, and so anyway, that was a really fun one. It was a while ago, but it was definitely a highlight of my Google career. I also was involved in the launch of Google Drive, and that was actually a 5-year stint from start to finish for me in my career. But I was there super early and had the opportunity to see it come into being from the very earliest days, and that was quite a journey.
Yeah, Google Fonts is something I'm very familiar with. I started my journey into tech thinking I wanted to become a designer, right? And so Google Fonts is one of the first tools I think that I was exposed to in the design realm, learning how to use fonts. And it's a great source to get access to, just thousands and thousands upon free fonts. And coming from the WordPress world, I don't know what the percentage is, but I would almost guess a majority of WordPress themes incorporate Google Fonts, because it's a free open source option for bringing in lots of font options. So I am curious. So there's one thing that you mentioned there. You said you've been at Google for 14 years and that you never thought you'd be somewhere for 14 years. And the thing that resonated with me there is this idea of, and you've said this a couple of times, of going from 0 to 1, and that being a part of what kept you there. And I'm curious, I think there's a lesson here, if not, possibly for founders and other business owners, but also for people who are operating within a larger organization. I think there's an idea here around keeping highly ambitious people engaged in the work they're doing in this concept of 0 to 1. So I wonder if you can speak a bit to how this whole 0 to 1 idea has kept you engaged at Google, as somebody who admittedly said you didn't think you'd be somewhere for 14 years.
So there's sort of like a formality to it, actually. There's a program called Area 120, which is an incubator within Google that is it's actually designed for this purpose. It's designed to go from 0 to 1, and actually the founder in residence role is part of Area 120. And I think the reason why that program exists is to shield, these brittle nascent projects from the other sort of general forces of the company, give them room to breathe and to come into their own. And I think for folks that are really interested in the 0 to 1, that's a safe space to go to do that work. Now, I've been really fortunate. I've also been able to go from 0 to 1 and the rest of Google, outside of Area 120, and I think I just credit that to just I was passionate about what we were going to do, and at the end of the day, you need to convince others to work on the project. You need to convince leadership to give you the resources, and I think they get a sense when there's a passionate set of individuals that want to go accomplish something, and then things build momentum. But actually, that momentum building is a tough game. It takes a long time to get those flywheels turning, and but once they get turning, it's incredible.
Yeah. Speaking of projects that at one point were probably turning slowly, that today are huge. Google Drive is another one that you mentioned that you were involved in. So tell us a little bit about that story. How did Google Drive come to be? How were you part of that launch?
We had a set of editors, the Google Docs suite, Docs, Slides, and Sheets, and these products were just incredible from a functionality perspective. It sort of the term was coined real-time collaboration, right? Suddenly, you went from editing static Word docs on your computer and syncing them, track changes over email, to a world where it's in the browser, you can see the people that are collaborating. And so those products just naturally were starting to get a massive amount of traction. And so as the evolution of those products, we started what we called the docs list, which was a list of all of your Google documents. Seemed like a fairly incremental improvement to the product suite. Like, if you had a couple hundred Google Docs, you have to go to a web page to go see all of them, right? Okay, so then we heard from our users, hey, I want to upload PDFs. I want to upload MP3s. At first, we were thinking, oh, this is a feature. It's I think at one point, on one slide, it was called a arbitrary file upload. Like it was sort of like a thing we could add to our online editor suite, right?
Mm-hmm.
The volume of those feature requests started getting louder and louder, and we also were looking at what was happening in the market and what people were demanding, and realized that there was this opportunity for us to launch a cloud storage solution. Mm-hmm. And I should say it was actually fairly obvious that we should do this. Like the company had been getting signals that we should be doing this for years before, at least 2 years before I'd even started on the project. And we had actually attempted to launch it a few times, but maybe a bit too early. And so it was the right time in history to start the project. We started with this very concrete set of use cases around the online editing suite. We brought that functionality in, we rebranded, and then I worked on the local sync clients, and that was a lot of fun. So that was the application for Mac and Windows that allowed you to sync your Google Docs and other files to your hard drive and across devices. That was a key pillar of our strategy, right? Which was to bridge the online. See, users' content was sort of bifurcated. They had all their PDFs and MP3s and Word docs still on their computer, and then they had all their real-time collaboration, Google Sheets, Slides, and documents in their browser. And it was incredibly gratifying to merge them. The sync client did that. It allowed you to see everything in one spot. And I think that wow factor was really the signs that we were onto something early on.
Yeah, I've been using Google products long enough. I think I actually remember a time when Google Docs existed prior to Google Drive, right? Like I've been using it long enough. I think I can actually remember that. Now it's hard to imagine a world where I don't have all of my stuff synced to the cloud somehow, right? Like it's almost inconceivable to think that I would run the risk of only storing things locally. And anytime somebody emails me a file now, I'm like, what in the world are you doing? Like, what, what are you thinking sending me this file as an attachment?
Right. Yeah. I think every time I get a piece of paper mail, I'm scanning it into my Google Drive and throwing it right in the recycling bin.
That's exactly right. Yeah. As a company, we actually rarely handle physical mail. Like we just have a service that gets our mail, scans it in for us. And then we get an email that says, here's your mail. And we can either 99% of the time we're just shredding it, right? If it's not a check or something from the IRS, right? It's going to the shredder. So yeah, absolutely. So obviously launching something as ambitious as Google Drive would not be without its fair share of challenges. So talk us through within, you're in this large organization. What are some of the challenges or hurdles you faced while launching Google Drive?
Yeah, I think it's that momentum building. That's always a challenge. We started with just 2 engineers, Paul and Frank, out of the New York office. This is probably 2010-ish timeframe. It was up to us as a team of 3 to prove that this was going to be the big deal we believed it could be. So we were evangelizing. I remember flying out to Boulder, Colorado, which I eventually moved to Boulder just a couple of years later because I was working out of there so often. But I remember flying out to Boulder and talking to the engineers who were on the docs list and saying, here's what we believe the future is, and check out this vision. And we were actually sitting out on the nice patio looking at the Flatirons at the time. I still remember it vividly. And so it's about getting people to be bought in and getting them excited about the vision and aligning people's giving them a North Star to aim for. Yeah. And so I think that was the challenge in the beginning. Our very first goal was to create a prototype that we could show people. And so we built this prototype that you could install on Windows. It was Windows first. We were basically getting a few dog fooders, then hundreds of dog fooders. These are people. So Google has a term called dog food. You eat your own dog food, basically use your own products. And so we were very fortunate to have thousands of dog fooders using basically what was just a prototype, and very passionate about what we were building and grow the quality of our product from there. And that's part, besides for selling it to the team that was going to build it, it was also selling it to our users. In hindsight, it's easy to even for me to say, oh yeah, like it was obvious what the product was going to be, but actually there was a lot of really interesting and difficult product decisions, like how deletes were going to sync. I don't want to get into the too much of the details because it might bore you, but like deletes are actually sort of dangerous. Here's why. Let's say you have a nested folder structure. You have a file that's in a folder that's in a folder, and you also have multiple devices. Well, if you delete one of the folders that contains a file, maybe way down the hierarchy, it actually will propagate a delete for that file across all your devices. And so it raises an interesting product question, one of dozens, which is, do you sync deletes bidirectionally? In other words, if you say yes to that question, if you answer that question yes, what's nice is that your tree looks consistent across all your devices. If you answer the question no, it's safer because you might have actually intended to delete the file on just one device. But then the downside is that you don't have a consistent view across your screens. And so like huge amounts of energy went into user studies to understand what people's expectations were about interacting with their files in a local environment, especially cloud files. Because what is a Google Doc when synced to your local? Does it actually delete if you delete it? Should it contain the data of the Google Doc, or should it be just a pointer? These are some really interesting questions we had to spend a lot of time thinking about. And that's fun. That's product definition work. And having empathy for users and all of the confusion points and making sure that the product we're building is highly usable for the average internet user was a big part of the job and a big part of the challenge of building a good product.
Yeah, that is interesting. I hadn't really thought about it in that context where you're taking a concept that has existed in one environment, in this case in a user's local computer, and you're pushing that to the cloud. And how does that, what you don't know necessarily what user expectations are going to be until you spend some time letting users play with it and asking them. And a lot of times I think users don't even intuitively know what the right answer to that question is. Like, I think if you just go to a user and say, hey, you've never used this product before. If you do X, what do you expect to happen? That may or may not reflect what actually happens when they're in the moment, focused on the task at hand and taking some type of action. That does sound like a really kind of unique unique problem. We do some of the same type of thing. I mean, we're not moving file systems into the cloud for the first time or anything like that, but we have like a whole internal testing procedure, which does include our own internal team. And then we have customers who are beta testers who have agreed to kind of be the guinea pig, so to speak, for new products before we push them out to the entire customer base. And the same type of iterative process where you are putting something in front of a customer or in front of a user, and then getting their feedback before you say, all right, this is how this should actually behave. That's interesting. So obviously Google Drive has gone on to be a huge success. In retrospect, looking back, is there anything you know now that you wish you'd known earlier in the process? So in other words, if you could go back and do it again, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, I feel like maybe it was just to, enjoy it more. Looking back now, it's easy to say this, but it was an incredible journey. And we were in the thick of it with all of these probably thousands of decisions we needed to make. Yeah. It was a fairly high stakes launch. Google was pretty serious about it, and we needed to stick the landing. And so we were appropriately stressed about getting it all right. And now I would just tell myself to relax a little bit and enjoy the process, because that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. No, I think that's actually probably resonates with me a little bit as I look back at my own journey. And I'm kind of thinking about you now as you're going through a similar process here with Zess. And it can be very challenging in the moment to have a good perspective on the positive parts of what you're doing, because a lot of times what you're doing is very hard, and it can be stressful, and it can be challenging. And you can be like, I'm not sure that this is something I want to do, right? Like today, maybe I don't want to do this, right? And then the benefit of hindsight is you go, you know what, actually that was some of the most rewarding stuff I've done. Yeah. So that's, I think that's one of those things that, you have to kind of occasionally step back and remind yourself, how far you've come, and almost like imagine yourself a few steps down the road and go, if I look at my current situation, the current set of challenges I'm facing and what I'm building, how am I going to feel about this a year from now or 6 months from now? And I think that can really help move past or work your way through some of the more challenging, difficult times as a founder, or just as somebody. I'm not a founder, but I'm somebody who's working in an organization that's changing rapidly. And so dealing with some of those things, that sense of perspective can really help.
I 100% agree. I feel like, the 0 to 1 journey is a roller coaster ride emotionally. There are times where you just want to give up and shut the project down, and you wonder why you're not working on easier, more incremental features for existing products. Yeah. Bringing something new into the world is a tough set of challenges, and it's not for the faint of heart. And years after launch, you could look back and say, that was easy, those are obvious. But I think when you're in it, it's tough. I think there's also the concept of, a healthy stress and a bad stress. And I think if you can create environments professionally where you're exposed to healthy stress, that's a really good good kind of stress. You actually want to be stressed. It means you're growing. It's just like building muscle. You have to break down the tissue for it to rebuild. And I think that's exactly what I was experiencing then. Although at times it felt bad, it's actually good for you, because it pushed me in all sorts of really important ways professionally.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing that grows you as a professional, or whatever it is you're doing, whether you're a developer, whether you're a salesperson, whether you're a marketer, or whether you're in operations, there's nothing that grows your skill set like facing a challenge that makes you uncomfortable, like facing a challenge that is a little bit outside of your current skill set, that requires you to develop new competencies, or just to be more resilient, right? Like there's nothing that's going to grow you. You're never going to be as good at whatever it is you do if you're always comfortable. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, there's a really good book called Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. And its premise is exactly this, which is basically the challenge associated with the task is actually the only path forward in life, and contentment and happiness, because it's about doing, it's about action. It's not about all hypotheticals. It's getting your hands dirty, having accountability to yourself, low ego. There's a lot of really interesting lessons in that book, and I highly recommend it.
Yeah. I want to come back to Google's Area 120, because I think the idea of Google having an incubator, or just a way of kind of launching new projects within a large organization, is going to be an interesting thing for some of our listeners to think through, to understand a little bit. So coming back to Area 120, tell us a little bit more about what Area 120 is.
Okay. Yeah. So it operates like a venture capital firm. There's a small handful of partners, and each partner scouts the company looking for founders and folks that are going to build the next best thing. And there's a pitch process. There's an application process. The partners are measured on how their investments pan out, and success in Area 120 is graduating back into mainstream Google, and being the seed of a new product area. It's quite an interesting layout, and I think it's a really exciting, fairly new. It's only 3 years old, actually. Yeah,
I was curious because you've been involved. You're involved in this current project through Area 120, but then there are these other projects, Google Fonts, Google Drive. I get the impression those predated Area 120 being a thing.
Yeah, they did.
Okay, so just completely different. So you're in kind of a new process here, and you've described a bit at a high level what Area 120 is. You got partners, you have founders, and you have teams that they're building out. So dial us in a little bit on that founder in residence role within that specific context. What's the responsibility of yourself as a founder in residence within that context?
Regardless of whether you're in Area 120 or not, but you work at Google, you can be an entrepreneur that goes from 0 to 1.
Okay.
There's plenty of opportunities to incubate new products, new launches outside Area 120. I think 120 is a formalization of this process and only adds to what the company can do, otherwise. And I think it is a really special part of the company because it's unique in that way, which is that there are people's founder in residence job who explicitly they're not supposed to launch anything as founder in residence. They're unlike any other product manager at Google. When you become a founder in residence, you're not actually measured on launching something. You're measured on your exploration. And so it's a unique opportunity for you to take a step back. And I think that gives you also to think more holistically across the company. As a product manager in ads or a product manager in YouTube, or whichever part of the company you're working in, you're obviously going to be thinking in your area. You're developing an expertise and conviction in your future and thinking about the industry and all the things that having the ability to sort of see across various product groups and also reflect holistically on where the internet is headed, where tech is going.
Yeah.
What's happening in fintech? What's happening in blockchain? What's happening in, whatever area that is relevant to the future, that you believe is relevant to the future, and then ask the higher level question: what is Google doing about it? And a lot of the times, we're doing all the right things. Like the founder in residence sees that there's stuff there, and he sort of leaves content that area alone, content knowing that they're like the bet they wanted to see Google make is happening. But then in many other areas, that's not the case. There's something that they believe, the founder in residence believes Google should be doing, and they're not. And then, the rest is now the founder in residence making that a reality.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've been involved in entrepreneurial activity there within Google, and we'll get to some of the stuff you've done outside of Google, because you've done some pretty interesting stuff outside of Google as well. The thing that it draws to my mind is that you have a little bit of a unique perspective on launching a project within a large organization like Google, as well as launching a project outside of an organization. And I'm curious what you view as the benefits of, what are some of the advantages to launching something within a larger organization like the Area 120 program?
There's a lot of momentum you can get with if you sort of strike the right chord with the right set of users. Google has a respected worldwide brand, and it's so amazing to pair those users up with a product that they wanted, and then just get that flywheel going from the user adoption perspective. And that's a luxury, and definitely something that's hard to achieve if you were to do a startup from scratch, right? Google has some of the best engineering talent in the world, and particularly in AI and machine learning. There's so much opportunity to work with these incredible engineers doing amazing work in their field and wrap a product around that. The most enjoyable part of Google for me is my coworkers, and just they inspire me every day in all that they do. And I just love being able to work with smart people and difficult problems, and it's a playground for solving difficult problems with smart people. So I think it's a community of people that are passionate about building really fantastic products, and we have a lot of fun. Have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Google has these great engineers in AI in these different spaces. I have to think that it can sometimes be a challenge as a founder to be like, I really want this developer to help me work on this. And that developer is also wanted by, 12 other people within the organization, right? Is it a challenge to get some of those, fantastic developers and engineers and whatnot, designers working on your projects?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I mean, the good news is that Google has a phenomenal roster of people working at the company, and so you can attempt to get them on your team, right? But it does not come by default, and good people have lots of good options. I think it's about that North Star that we were talking about earlier. Having a vision that people are excited about. People, I think, generally want to be part of a big narrative, a big launch, a strategic launch, a difficult problem even. They want to feel part of something, a movement. And I think it's the role of product managers and also founder in residence to inspire people to aim toward one singular vision. And I think in some cases, the more audacious the vision, the easier it is to attract that talent, because good people want meaty challenges.
Yeah. The more I hear you talk about the founder in residence program, the more it sounds like, I don't know, I guess I'm struck by the breadth of responsibilities that flow from that role, where you have to, take a look at an area, fintech, just as an example, and say, what's happening in this industry? How is Google interacting with this industry? Is there an opportunity here, something that we should be doing differently? And then you have to not just identify an opportunity, but kind of like think about the idea on top of that and marshal resources to it. And there's definitely going to be competition within the organization for those different resources. So I guess I'm just struck by the breadth of the role and the sense in which it sounds like you're very much operating as almost the way an entrepreneur operates outside of the organization, with the exception of you have, I almost want to say constraints, but I guess it would just say you have resources that you can draw on a little bit more readily. But am I getting the right sense here that this is an extremely broad and open-ended thing that Google puts people into, this founder in residence program?
So, I mean, I think that even outside the company as a startup, attracting talent is a really important part of success, right? Yeah. And of course, there's ridiculously good talent outside of Google as well as inside of Google. But I think that Google it's almost like a community, if you will. I have some really profoundly deep professional relationships with my colleagues who have worked with for years on a variety of things. And so it's part of my way in which I bring product into the world is knowing the people that I want to involve in that effort. And they trust me to lead them and to set that vision. I trust them with a whole lot about how to execute and the technical decisions of how to build. And so it's not necessarily that it's an advantage, because Google has all the great engineering talent. It's more that it's my comfort zone. It's my it's my community. There's just so many amazing people inside the company that that I feel like it's an endless supply, and I'm always meeting more people that are doing excellent things. And I don't know, it's probably the same. It's probably the same outside of Google as well. But I'm certainly I'm certainly a bit biased. I mean, Google's got some really amazing people.
Yeah. All right. So moving a little bit outside of the Area 120 program, but kind of still focusing in on your experience as an entrepreneur. So you have done some stuff outside of Google. Can you tell us about some of the other products or companies you've been involved in?
Yeah, I did Y Combinator back in college, and that was what actually got me into tech. Well, I was a web developer in high school, and had dabbled in tech, but it was really Y Combinator that sort of opened my eyes to Silicon Valley and the Bay Area and how crazy it was and what it meant to really go for it. So my buddies and I, three of us total, took a leave of absence and went and started a startup. It was in the Web 2.0 days. We were a mashup on top of Google Maps. It was a social network on top of Google Maps, actually. So it was it was actually it was basically Foursquare before the iPhone came out. It was called Flagger, Flagr, and it got to 100,000 users or so, and they had a really fantastic community that was developing on it, but it never reached escape velocity. But man, did it teach me a lot about building product, and actually I wouldn't have been hired at Google if I hadn't done Flagger, because I had lived and breathed the 0 to 1 product design. I was even coding. I was wearing many hats. I was preparing for the interview right from the start, right? Actually, you can sort of get a sense for whether you want to work at a company based on the interview questions, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So that was my first company, besides for the web design company in high school. And then, so I was given a job at Google. And if I hadn't been given a job, I probably would have started a startup. It was a really enjoyable experience, but anyway, decided to take a job at Google. And the first job they gave me was associate product manager for Google Checkout, which is a tool for sellers, for merchants to sell items online. And I had no experience with e-commerce. Google, by the way, is they generally hire generalists. So it's like folks that don't necessarily come from industry experience in the role, but that they trust can figure it out, so to speak. And so, fresh out of engineering school, I was product manager for the seller side of Google Checkout, and I wanted to learn my own tool, and so built a web store and became a user of not only Google Checkout, but of AdWords. So learned all about how the paid advertising world works, analytics, and how to think about funnels and conversion rates and engagement metrics and lifetime customer value. And I was learning it firsthand. Actually, sort of by mistake, grew that to a company with meaningful revenue. And I had built a Shopify store. It was, from my research, one of the best platforms at the time, and still is actually, to build a web store. And so became one of Shopify's largest customers.
Yeah.
And actually had a pretty good business selling TV wall mounts online of all things. It was at a time when everyone was updating their big TVs for flat screens and mounting them to the wall. And my wife and I had just brainstormed that, hey, I should just sell TV wall mounts. At the time, we had just got an apartment in Brooklyn, and we had gone to some store, and it was $150 for this piece of metal, and we're like,
yeah,
but this is you can go online and get this for $50. So we saw the opportunity to put a business together there, and so that was really interesting. I think that actually it was one of the first examples of something that I like to have repeated, which is to be your own user. And maybe like what we were talking about with Zest, with Google being its own user, it just gives you a perspective on what to build and keeps it real and not hypothetical. And so that the e-commerce the e-commerce company no longer exists, but it had a good run. But actually, I invest in direct-to-consumer brands even today because I'm just so passionate about DTC, and as from those years operating that company, became interested in the space of e-commerce. And there's something amazing, by the way, about e-commerce in the sense that a lot of times in software, the changes you make take a while to materialize. And the metrics that you're measuring sometimes they're a little bit laggy. Whereas in e-commerce, you have a conversion rate. You have lots of metrics, but your conversion rate's one of the big ones. And you make a change to your website, and your conversion rate goes up, and you're making more money. You're more profitable. And so the immediate feedback loop of e-commerce is addicting, I find.
Yeah.
And so it's a cool hobby, to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have this experience of accidentally building a fantastically successful or reasonably successful Shopify store just by accident. And you've also been involved in a lot of really successful products, Google Fonts, Google Drive. So as you are approaching a project and you're looking for leading indicators or key factors for identifying this is a project worth pursuing, this is something that has some legs to it, something that might stand a chance of success. What are some of those indicators? What are some of those guidelines that you look for to say this is a project that has some potential?
Is it an interesting problem, first of all? Are you going to be able to attract top talent? Are you going to be able to stay engaged? It's every project, every idea starts in a honeymoon phase, and everything is perfect. Everything's going to work. Very little about the realities of the business concept. I like to think that you want to escape that honeymoon phase as quickly as possible and get into the real work. Not imaginary work, but real work. And real work is discovered oftentimes over the course of many months and years, actually. You never really stop. But I think so having something interesting that attracts the talent you want to work with, then is going to keep you can be passionate about it, because when things get real, it's important that you continue to be engaged. Having that path forward with that real work, I feel like the old way in which software was built was a waterfall method, and some teams still practice this, but in the waterfall method, there was a spec, everyone agrees on the spec, and then the team goes off for 6 months and builds it.
Yeah.
And that worked in a world where you had to ship something on a CD and mail it out to your customers. But actually, the web opened up an opportunity for a much more adaptive process. And there's agile, and there's lots of other methodologies. It doesn't matter which flavor, but they're all of the type that they're more flexible than waterfall. And to me, when you're evaluating the new concept, I think it's important to get into the real work as quickly as possible and identify your first few steps. It might be just the very first inkling of a prototype that you're going to build, but I think it's really important to have your path, both balancing where you would like to head and what it could mean, what the product could be with maximum success. So those are fun things to think about, but those are the types of thoughts you think about in the honeymoon phase. And then, instead, now channeling your energy into what are those first few iterations of a product. And what I find happens is that when you hit that first milestone that's meaningful, and oftentimes it doesn't take more than a few weeks even to get that first milestone, you end up getting that flywheel going, and you can just feel the momentum start to build. And when you get into that position where you actually are getting that flywheel to go faster and faster and faster, then it's just a matter of patience. And if you chose correctly based on the topic, obviously making sure that this is the thing that people want, and that flywheel keeps on going faster and faster, then it's just a matter of patience, staying in the game until that thing is humming. And the process of bringing that in product into the world, I think is just, in some ways, it's just a grind to get that flywheel going fast enough that it has reached an escape velocity, and will continue to exist even if you step away as the founding team.
Yeah. No, that resonates a lot with what I see working at Kinsta as well, where, like you described, we definitely don't have a waterfall approach to software or to product. And I think that anybody who operates in the SaaS space or just in any sort of web-based business, if you're operating with a waterfall mentality, your days are numbered, and the number isn't very big. The internet just moves way too fast. You cannot say, this is our product, we shipped it, we're done. Like that idea just doesn't work. There has to be a continuous iterative approach to, this is our product today, but what do our customers need? Where's the internet going? Where's the product going? How do we stay relevant? How do we stay actually a step ahead of the curve if we can? But I think you're right. You kind of look at all these different pieces of what's going to make this idea work. There's the distribution piece and the marketing piece, and there's the product piece, design, development. And you kind of build those processes and you build the momentum. And then as you go along, you do tweak things, you do refine things as you go. But by and large, it really is just about keeping those wheels turning, like establishing those processes, recognizing there is no single destination. Like, this is a process that you have to build and then move forward, and then watching it roll out. I just want to, say that I see the same principle at work in Kinsta, which is obviously a much smaller company than Google. We're a company of about 190 at this point, but I see the same sort of principles driving what makes Kinsta work, as what you're saying have made these different projects work for you within the Google ecosystem. So yeah. As we move this conversation towards a conclusion, I've got a couple of wrap-up questions for you. The first, do you have any kind of a resource you would recommend to listeners of this podcast? This could be a book, a newsletter, somebody to follow on Twitter, anything. Like, is there something you'd recommend and say, listeners of Reverse Engineered need to check this out?
Yeah, the Ryan Holiday books. Big fan. Obstacle is the Way is one of my favorites. Ego is the Enemy is another. Just a phenomenal writer. Just so densely packed with insight about the human condition and what we all strive for, and how our ego can get in the way of success. And I think it's actually really relevant to product 0 to 1 path. Yeah. I really like Cathie Wood at ARK Invest. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of her. She's a public equity investor, runs a series of funds structured as ETFs. But I started becoming a fan of Cathie. She actually gives a lot of podcast interviews, and the first one I listened to maybe 5 years ago at this point, she was just so skilled at talking about the future and what innovation means in various ways. She has these 5 innovation platforms that her fund tracks, things like electrification, like basically electric vehicles. I think she calls it energy storage, blockchain technology, genomics, robotics, and there's one more. And so she basically breaks down how these innovation platforms are accelerating, and we as humans are really bad at extrapolating exponential growth, where like our minds cannot comprehend what exponential means if you compound it over many years. And so she has a really unique way of looking at the future of human progress and uses that as an edge to invest. And I just really enjoy the work she puts out, talking about what the future looks like along all of those dimensions. And her content's always super interesting.
Yeah. So Ryan Holiday and Cathie Wood. Is there something else you wanted to recommend?
The internet's got a lot of really good content. I really like the Accelerated newsletter from Justine and Olivia Moore at Charles River. They're actually twins. I have 2 sets of twins, so maybe I have a liking to twins. But Justine and Olivia are they write an incredible newsletter called the Accelerated Newsletter, and it covers a lot of things related to commerce and tech, and I just find it really on point every week. And so that's another one I would recommend.
Okay, awesome. Good deal. So where can our listeners learn more about you and about Area 120?
Sure. Yeah, I'm on Twitter, David Wurtz, and I think area120.com is probably the best place to go to learn more about Area 120.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, David, and thank you to our listeners. That's it for today's podcast. You can access the episode show notes at kinsta.com/podcast. That's KINSTA.com/podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to Reverse Engineered and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or the platform you're listening on right now. See you next time.